Welcome to the theory notes for SITHCCC019 Produce Cakes, Pastries and Breads. A little bit of information first up on some a glossary of terms, I guess, on ingredients. Okay, so some of the more regular terms that we will find throughout this process. Okay, baking powder. Baking powder is a little bit different to baking soda. Baking soda is a chemical compound, bicarbonate of soda, and baking powder is a mixture of bicarb and cream of tartar. Okay, and this is used in cakes for a chemical aeration. Okay, so we talk about aeration in a couple of different forms. Where we have manual aeration, which is where we use something like eggs, which will make our cake rise. Another form that we could use is chemical aeration, where we would use baking powder or bicarb, or indeed self-raising flour, SRF. So self-raising flour is plain flour that has the baking powder already mixed into it. Okay, and this is how we achieve chemical aeration in various products. Okay, so it's a little white powder that we mix in with our flour, with our dry ingredients. Okay, you've got glycerin there, which is a colourless, odourless sort of Swedish liquid used in cake mixes. Helps to maintain the length at which we can keep cakes for. Okay, so we don't replace sugar with glycerin, but we use it with the sugar. Okay, so we replace a portion of the sugar. Icing sugar. You can make icing sugar. Okay, so for anyone that is into cakes, has made cakes before, or simply you see it at the shops, you get a couple of different types of sugars. You can get raw sugar, brown sugar, white sugar, caster sugar, icing sugar, and you'll also find icing mixture. Okay. So icing sugar is essentially just really, really fine sugar. In fact, if you take granulated sugar, like white sugar or caster sugar, and put it into a food processor, you can make fine sugar that way, icing sugar that way. Okay. Essences are flavored liquids or aromatic liquids. So it's a liquid that either is flavored or is colored and is used to do that to the product. Okay, so we might use a vanilla essence or a rose essence or a peppermint essence to make our biscuits or cakes or breads taste like that aroma. Pastry cream, creme patissiere, is a type of custard. Okay, a thickened custard. Okay, custard is essentially made from milk, egg yolks, and sugar, we can either use vanilla essence or lemon zest here. Now, typically when we use vanilla or lemon, it is there to dull the flavour of the egg. Okay, so our product, whatever it is, doesn't taste too eggy. Okay, and then the pastry cream is thickened in some way with some sort of starch. Traditionally, it was flour. Nowadays, it's corn flour or agar or another thickener. And the last one there, clarified butter, is also known as ghee. Okay, Indian term. You get a couple of different types of flours, and they're used for different purposes. Okay, weak flour is essentially plain flour that has had a starch added to it. Okay, so we use weak flour when we're making when we want really, really light cakes. Okay, like a sponge of some sort. Okay, so you need the flour to give the product structure. So when it rises, the flour helps to set the cake in the shape. Similarly, what you find with souffles, and we saw this in the last subject that we were learning, a souffle will rise just like a cake, but without the flour there to structure, to hold it into shape, the souffle sinks. Whereas when we've got the cakes here, the flour helps the cake to stay in the shape that it cooks to. It does talk about gluten there, but the only reason the wheat flour is low in gluten is because generally the wheat flour, and it's also known as cake flour, is half and half plain flour and starch. Okay, strong flour is just a 100% wheaten flour. Okay, so it has more gluten in it. Another term here is egg wash. Now, you may recall when we were back in the subject eggs, produce eggs, vegetables, fruits, and farinaceous dishes, we talked about eggs and the culinary uses of eggs. Egg wash is, and we talked about glazing. Okay, so egg wash is sometimes we take eggs and we mix it with water. Other times, most of the time, it's with milk. But essentially, an egg wash, the best egg wash will be just plain egg yolks. Okay, and I guess we add other things like water or milk to soften or to soften the color of the glaze. Okay, so if it's just egg yolks, you get a real thick, dark glaze. But if we're going to cook something for a little bit longer, you can find that the egg yolks will go quite dark and eventually will burn, okay, because it has quite a high fat content. Okay. Quite often we find products like brioche gets brushed with egg yolk, and that gives that nice brown, browny crust. Ganache, another term here. It's a rich chocolate filling or glaze, and essentially ganache can be different thicknesses and different. It comes out different colours as well, based on the ratio of chocolate to cream. Okay, so a ganache really is a 50-50 of chocolate and cream is usually what we use, but depending on what we're going to use it for, will determine the ratio of the chocolate and the cream. Some classical breads, cakes, and pastries here. Okay, so you can see a Genoise sponge down the bottom. It's a classic sponge. And classically, this is made from manual aeration. Okay, so whipping of our eggs and then folding in, being really gentle with all our other ingredients, and then adding some melted butter. Okay, a more contemporary way of making a Genoise would be to separate our eggs and whip up our egg whites first, and then add our egg yolks into it, and then fold the other ingredients in, and it makes for a much more user-friendly recipe. Okay, Croquembouche is that picture up there on the left with the profiterole tower. You've got some baguettes there next to it, some classic French-shaped breads. Bûche à Noël is the next one, or a Yule log. Okay, and then opera cake, classic layered chocolate cake. Contemporary breads, cakes and pastries. Yeah, you've got pull apart loaf down there, down the bottom. Gluten-free breads, gluten-free cakes, ham, cheese and pineapple Danish square. Oh, that's interesting. Pistachio and lemon cake with honey fruits. Chia and fruit loaf. Hot cross buns with chocolate chips. Yeah, which come out on what, Boxing Day, the day after Christmas. Tastes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 tastes. Sweet, sour, salty, bitter, umami. Okay, and you can see from the tongue there, the tongue recognizes them in different spots. Okay, couple of descriptions there for you. Savory food is often categorized as anything not sweet, and sweet is a flavor that comes naturally in fruit or comes in chocolate or in candy. Chocolate. Okay. Classically, you get chocolate in two forms: compound chocolate and couverture chocolate. Okay. Compound chocolate is the cheaper version. Couverture chocolate is the more expensive version. Compound chocolate is much more easy to work with because it is vegetable oil based, whereas couverture is cocoa butter based. And so they have different melting properties, and you have to handle them at different ways. Compound chocolate, very easy to use. It comes available in white, milk, dark, and ruby now as well. Melts at about 30 to 32 degrees, and couverture needs to be tempered. Okay, so that's where there's that term again, tempering. Okay. And tempering, as we discussed, is about bringing a product to the correct temperature. Now, couverture chocolates will have instructions on their bags as to the temperature range, but tempering with chocolate means you take it up to a temperature, then you bring it down to a temperature, then back to a medium temperature. There are a couple of different methods: the seeding method, vaccination, tabling. But that's sort of more advanced patisserie skills. Coloured and flavoured sugars, we can use these for different reasons. You've got a mint sugar there. We could make a lemon sugar. We could make, the classic one is vanilla sugar, right? So if we're using fresh vanilla beans, which is the best vanilla product that we can use, then we scrape all the seeds out, and then we put the bean into sugar, and that will flavour the sugar. Other sugars get used for different properties. I've made cinnamon sugar before, where we sprinkle it on toast. I've also made watermelon sugar, and the bar would use it as part of their cocktails. You could certainly use that application for many different reasons and different applications. Fruits. Fruits come in a couple of different ways. You can get them peeled, trimmed, prepared, processed, sliced, diced, or maybe certainly fresh, whole, preserved, crystallized, or sugared. Okay, or dehydrated as well. And we may even do that to our fruits. Based on seasonality. Okay, so if you go out to the markets around Christmas time, you can get big boxes of fruit real cheap. The problem with that is, what do you do with it? Fruit purees. We use fruit purees for several different reasons, or several different ways. You can make it yourself as a coulis, or you can buy it in. And there are some great products in there. The ones you buy in, they're either heat treated, or they have salts or other additives in them that reduce the enzymatic browning. Okay, so we don't have that Maillard effect where a product browns due to the oxygenation. glazes. Classic one there is for lemon cakes or maybe for donuts. Okay, so Krispy Kreme donuts. Yeah, glossy finish. You could dip them or drip it on with a brush, or you get these fancy machines that sort of splash it on. You can get neutral flavors, or you can get or you can get um, um, flavored glazes, strawberry glaze, chocolate glaze, are probably the two classic ones. Icings. A couple of different icings we can make. Yeah, water icing, fudge icing, fondant, royal icing, buttercream. Yeah, it's essentially it does two things. It makes it look nicer, but also it's there to add a different sense, a different olfactory sense to the product. Okay, so you get dry cake, but then you get this sweet fattiness from the icing that complements the dry cake. Jellies, real easy. A lot of the time it's just a set juice or a set liquid. Okay, you can make it in these forms, or you could certainly make a jelly that would sit inside a cake as well, depending on how clever you are. But there you go. That's me dusting some icing sugar, and you can see Maillard in the background there. We've got sprinkled icing sugar, right? It's a finishing, used as a finishing tool. Okay. Whole or crushed nuts. Generally, we don't use whole nuts, or if we do, it then gets processed later. Okay, so you can toast them, roast them, you can even slice them or shave them, or you could use them whole if you're making a praline or a nougatine, where you add something to the nuts and then you crush it at a later date. 3 main ingredients for cakes: eggs, sugar, flour. Real basic, right? Primary ingredients of a basic aerated sponge. Meringues, one of my favorites. We used to make this, and a favorite of many patissiers, because essentially it's about using product up, minimizing wastage, right? So there is generally, and if you have a look in the e-learning, there is a video on meringues. 3 different ways to make meringues, or 3 different styles: the French style, the Italian style, and the Swiss style. Okay, and actually, I think I spoke about this in desserts, but yeah, they're made in slightly different ways, just to for different applications. Essentially, you get these sort of those 3 there. 1, 2, 3, the orange one, the pink and green one, and the red and chocolatey ones. They would all probably be made in the French style. And the one on the end there looks like it's probably a Bon Alaska, which is where we just torch the outside, which you realistically have to use a cooked meringue to do it that way. So an Italian meringue or a Swiss meringue. Okay, obviously for food safety. Minimizing. Okay. Mousse cake is a cake with mousse used as all or part of the filling for the cake. Yeah, yum, chocolate mousse. Fruit cake is a popular cake made with strong, plain and self-raising flour, dried mixed fruit, red glacé cherries, dried dates, orange rind, yeah, a whole mixture of things. It's a traditional Christmas cake. Okay, and very popular with the oldies. Genoise, we spoke about that one earlier, a classic sponge that relies on whipping air into the mix of egg and sugar before it is folded into the flour. Muffins. Muffins are pretty cool because they're little cakes and they can be savoury or sweet. Okay, little domed sponge cake. Cold set cake is a cake that's not baked to produce it, but is put in the refrigerator to set. Right, so cheesecake is a classic example. Okay, so cheesecake's real. A cold set cheesecake is really nice. You get your biscuits and your butter, and you mix that together, and you press it into a tin, and then you whip up your cream cheese and cream and maybe eggs as well, and the flavour, and then you fill that on top of the biscuit crumbs, and then that's it. Set it in the fridge, and the whipped cream and the cream cheese, they firm up, and you have this lovely cheesecake. Swiss roll, nice picture. Yeah, it's essentially just a real thin sponge cake, and rolled and filled with jam and maybe cream. Nice one. Nice Madeira cake there, lightly lemon flavoured, firm sponge. Yeah, we used to make a Madeira cake of sorts. We used to call them lemon drizzle cakes. And beautiful cake. It certainly is made from chemical aeration. And we would then soak it in a lemon sugar syrup. Gee, it was delicious. We used to make about 15 of them just for this one delicatessen. Friands and financiers. Okay, they're little small almond cakes. They're made with flat almond flour, and you can make them. Gluten free, but then you really need to put paper underneath them when you bake them, because the almond can stick to the tin even if you grease them well. Croissants. Okay, so crescent shaped buttery flaky pastry. Right, so croissant, we get three forms of laminated doughs. Okay, you get croissant dough, Danish dough, and puff pastry. Okay, and the lamination is essentially where we take our dough and press butter onto the inside of it, and then fold the dough over the butter, and then we roll it, and then we fold it, and then we roll it, and then we fold it, and before you know it, we've got lots and lots of layers of a yeast dough with butter in between, and the yeast and the steam from the butter, when it cooks, helps to make that puff up and rise. Short pastry or short paste. Okay, so technically when the pastry is raw, it's called a paste, and when it's cooked, it's called a pastry. Okay, this is short pastry is has a biscuit-like texture, and this is called pâte brisée when it's a short crust. Okay, you also get pâte sablée or pâte sucrée, which is similar to short pastry, but we add sugar. Okay, choux paste. Okay, you got choux pastries there. You got some profiteroles, some eclairs, some choux swans, and some choux buns. Yep, here you go. Sweet pastry, pâte sucrée. Okay, a couple of different things that we can use it for. Strudel paste, a little bit different. This is quite German, this pastry, or Austrian, depending on who you talk to. It's really, 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 really thin, and we stretch it rather than roll it. layer and layer and layer, similar to filo pastry. Yeah, puff pastry. So you can see there the aeration inside the puff pastry, similar to the croissant dough. The difference is with the croissant pastry, we add yeast into the dough. Okay, this one gets used for pies and sausage rolls, maybe turnovers. Danish pastry, yeah. Again, thin yeast dough. Similar to the croissant dough, except it's got egg yolks in it. There you go, list of bake times there and temperatures. So technically what we find is, so you've got to pay attention to time and temperature, okay? But with any cooking, time and temperature is what a lot of it's all about. But some of these products, you can see like the croissants, for example, that's quite a high temperature because we need that initial bounce when it goes in the oven, okay? If you put croissants in at a low temperature, what happens is the butter spills out of the croissants before it has a time to rise, okay? Environmental conditions. Yeah, lots of them with baking, okay? We need to protect from external damage, especially waters and liquids. High risk foods under refrigeration, obviously, danger zone rules there. Don't forget dating and timing labels, wrapping as we need to. Salads need to be stored undressed. Yeah, no freezing of dressings for salads, store in food grade containers, all the usual points there about environmental conditions. Sugar-free, we spoke about this in diets. This is a dessert that uses a sugar alternative in lieu of sugar, okay, or honey. Honey's the same thing, has the same glycemic index as sugar. 3 things to avoid there with diabetes: sugar, fats, and carbohydrates. Vegan diets, we need to avoid the eggs and the dairy. Baguettes, yeah, as I said before. French stick, bath bun. This is a sweet roll made from milk-based yeast dough, okay, and sugar sprinkled on top. Fruit buns, exactly the same as hot cross buns, but non-religious. Okay, French roll there, a soft white milk roll. Yeah, they've got slashes in the top which produce ears when you cook them. Unleavened bread. There's many forms of this unleavened bread. Okay, it's generally a dough that is made without a rising agent. Okay, so an Afghan bread or a pita bread or something that doesn't rise, paratha. Cakes. There you go. Some historical examples might be Madeira, butter and plain cakes were all derived from the basic pound cake. Cultural examples might be a sponge cake that's adapted to become lamingtons in Australia. A cronut, maybe a cultural or a historical version. Yeah, the mixture of the croissant and the donut. Some historical examples of pastries here, and this was the pasty. Okay, so this was created for the workers to take down into the mines, and they put this little ridge on the outside of the pastry so the miners didn't have to wash their hands before they ate. Some cultural examples for pastries might be Americans added cream cheese and fruit to Danish pastry to create what are now known as Danish pastries. Historical examples of breads, yeah, flatbreads have been adapted to become wraps. Sourdough, we've seen the rise of sourdough. Cultural examples for fruit buns adapted into hot cross buns for Easter. Or even just after Christmas. So bread, we're talking about bread now. This is an interesting topic, okay, because there's a lot of information to be aware of here, okay. Um, so the fermentation cycle is that we start off with our yeast, and we add sugar and water to it, and a chemical reaction occurs where the yeast ferments, creates alcohol, and the alcohol produces carbon dioxide, and then if we activate the gluten in the flour, that traps the CO2 into little balloon-like pockets inside the bread, and that's how we get rise in the bread. Okay, fermentation cycle. Dough development. You can see here, this picture is a picture of someone testing the gluten window. Okay, so essentially, once we've mixed all our ingredients, and if we've mixed them properly, we need to stretch and fold the dough to develop the gluten. Now, if we're making quick bread, we can mix all this up in the mixing machine and it does it all by itself. If we're making sourdough, which is a real long process, this gluten forming happens just by the amount of time that the liquid is in with the flour. Couple of points here about the and just generic statements about the nutritional value of cakes, when realistically they're pretty poor nutrition. They're typically high in saturated fats, added salts and added sugars, high in kilojoules. They do contain carbohydrates, fats, fiber, proteins, vitamins and minerals, but typically in the format that is not particularly good for you. Okay, adding fats. So a couple of reasons here as to why we add fat to grow, why fat is added. It adds flavor, it adds moisture, it gives richness, it can soften the final product, and it also supports the aeration. Okay. One particular point to consider here is that when mixing ingredients for cakes, pastries and breads, we should first be mixing our dry ingredients together, mixing our wet ingredients together, and then combining them. Okay, as soon as you add liquid into flour, you activate the gluten. There you go, adding water. Yeah, it's to activate the gluten. Okay, which is a stabilizer. Chilled work surfaces. My mum used to make, when I was younger, she used to make a lot of pastry products, and old school methods were always about using chilled work surfaces and ingredients. You can tend to find that if your butter becomes too soft with certain products, it combines in a different way. Okay. Also, you can see there the water absorbs slower, okay, which reduces the way the gluten works. Cutting, shaping, and molding. Okay, probably sounds quite straightforward, but a lot of it's about portion control. Shaping is just about aesthetics, the way it looks, and molding is also just about aesthetics, the way we want it to look. Kneading. Kneading is a process, and we will come to this in class. It's about stretching the proteins, which ultimately is just developing the gluten. Activities involved in preparing fillings. Yeah. So fillings, we might be talking about fruits, we might be talking about pastry cream, we might be talking about frangipane. There's lots of different things that we could be talking about there, but essentially some generic terms there about fillings: thawing, mincing, peeling, slicing, dicing, cooking. Resting the dough. I find that A lot of people struggle with this one in when we get to working with bread in the kitchen. Okay, it's important to rest your dough when you're making bread. One, it helps to disperse all the ingredients evenly. Two, it helps to form the long protein chains for the final structure. Okay, so it's again development of gluten. Rolling, obviously, it's just about getting it to the right thickness that we're after. The key to selecting and preparing equipment is follow the standard recipe. The only time that you should be changing recipes at all is when you're a master of a product. Okay? To turn around and change a recipe or a method or ingredients when you are a novice pastry person is quite frankly just silly. Okay? Stirring and aerating. Stirring is just about getting everything mixed in evenly, and aerating is about creating volume and a soft ingredient. Okay, so a couple of reasons why we need to ensure the ratio of the batter to the finished product is correct. Okay, so this is about quality control. If the batter is not at the right consistency, then the cake's just not going to work properly. Okay, you've got to get it to the right consistency so that the cooking time is correct. Otherwise, we're going to have to either cook it for a shorter amount of time or cook it for a longer amount of time, so that it's a quality product in the end and it meets the customer's expectations. Measurements. Why do we weigh ingredients properly? Now, in the kitchen, you can see right in the center there's a couple of spoon measures. Cup measures are also something that's regularly used by home bakers. We don't do this. Okay, in a commercial context, you should be weighing your ingredients. And likewise, if you look at, if you find recipes that are measured using cup measures or spoon measures, this is not a good recipe. Okay, precision. Baking and patisserie is all about precision. And if you don't follow the rules as set down in the instructions of the method, things can go wrong and you won't know why. So many people struggle to make macarons, and it's simply because they don't follow the proper rules and instructions for making macarons. Okay, precision. Sieving. Okay, and you can see a couple of sieves there. One's a drum sieve, one's a strainer, and one's a flour sieve. Okay, ultimately, some people believe it's about making the product lighter. That's not particularly right. The correct reason that we sieve is to remove any impurities. Okay, any hard lumps. It can separate any firm lumps, and that makes it easier to mix with other ingredients. It's not particularly about making things lighter. Whisking, simply combining and aerating. Folding. So folding is a process where we gently incorporate ingredients together. Okay, if we use a whisk to incorporate ingredients, then there's a chance that we can knock the air out of our product. So if we're working with a manual aeration product, we have to fold our ingredients. If we're working with chemical aeration, then simply combining with a whisk is fine. Piping. Piping is a finishing product. As I said earlier, it's also about adding an extra element to your product. You can see the picture over there, a couple of different methods for piping. Spreading. What we're talking about with spreading is essentially adding the layer nice and evenly. Okay, and you can see There's a couple of methods there with some offset spatulas that move the icing around so that it's nice and even and aesthetically pleasing. That's it, guys. Thanks for watching, guys and girls. SITHCCC019 Produce cakes, pastries, and breads.